All right, welcome to the Dealan-de podcast. Here with Anayza. Is that how you say your name?
Anayza.
Do you want to just describe yourself, or let us know who you are a little bit?
Okay, my name is Anayza. I work as an intuitive energy healer and facilitator, and I support people to connect with their own intuition and kind of understand the know-how of being their own healer, as well as supporting them in like deep trauma healing. And I also have this passion in kind of reimagining intimacy, and so what it means for us to be intuitive and intimate, connective beings. So yeah, it's a bit about me.
Excellent. And so I definitely, we kind of met through, I guess, Facebook. I just love your post. I love what you were sharing. And you sort of talked about, I guess the part I liked, or I was just interested in you're just talking about the trauma healing I mean, it's like, it feels like you're on either side, like trauma and then intimacy. Like, whoa, two big pieces that can feel very separate and like they water
Mm,
and oil a bit. Like, how do we deal with that?
mm.
What's your thoughts on those?
I want to say you're breaking up a bit.
Oh,
Um,
sorry.
no, it's okay. I just, yeah. So, but I got your question. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I have the shape of my work or the body of my work. I feel like spans. For me, it spans a wide range, which is both really beautiful and can feel sometimes a bit like you said, like, oh, interesting. So, hmm, I'm not the one who said this. I'm not sure who said this, but someone has said trauma happens in isolation and healing happens in relationship.
Oh, that's
And
beautiful.
yeah, and
So,
I really feel that many times when we experience pain comes into trauma because we weren't held in an environment that allows us to express what has happened to us and feel supportive. And so I feel us being able to kind of understand how to be together creates a nourishing field where trauma actually can't actually take root. Doesn't mean pain doesn't happen, doesn't mean hurt doesn't happen, but trauma is the development of pain and hurt over time, held in isolation, feeling like you're alone in something that's happened to you. And even I know many people have been through traumatic situations who then, because people around them are in pain, have experienced exclusion, isolation, like shaming, blaming, all these things that makes it really that kind of doubles down, in those environments, because we're not in a right now our society isn't well versed of how to respond to deep emotional turmoil and pain. So I really feel us deepening our capacity to kind of understand what it means to be together, to be in intimacy. And I mean, like an energetic and connect, like kin, like Kin, connective intimacy and connection can really foster an environment where we know how to be together, and therefore we know how to heal. Our being is healing for ourselves and for each other.
yeah, a lot of the podcast I'm doing here is connecting sort of spiritual work, as one would call it, or personal development, kind of healing oneself, and then in relationship, but then also I do have guests that talk about very political and big
Mm,
world issues about like from the war in Ukraine to what's happening, and I see a tie into the both of them. Often like we very personal, like you said, isolated. I'm dealing with my trauma, or oh, I'm isolated dealing with my growth or personal. But then, like,
mhm.
how does that relate to getting out of the bubble and being connected in a world that feels very traumatized and very like
Yeah,
isolating and very everybody in their own
yeah,
bubble? Um,
yeah.
how do you relate to that, or how?
Yeah, it's true. I feel, and it can feel that way, which is why I'm really passionate about being in power spaces and creating spaces where we know how to slow down and respond to what's present and respond to the pain and hurts that's there, because there is so much like intergenerational, ancestral, collective, like racial, gender. There's so many things within the field that we experience personally. But even though this is something that's happening to a subset of our race, gender, culture, it's like it lives in our personal bodies and they come up within our personal interactions. And so it's sort of like holding a framework that allows that without necessarily know. I don't necessarily like know the answer, and I don't think it's really about knowing the exact answer. It's about being able to slow down enough to be present and loving and expanding our perspective enough to kind of hold a wide spectrum of being, of history that we all like carry within us. um and yeah, and so like something I'm really interested in, and what you said is really true. I think the healing journey can be kind of isolating. It's like thing of self-awakening and inner awakening. A lot of people spending time with themselves, and that's really necessary. It's like really necessary for us to do that. But something I hosted my first retreat last summer, and something I saw there that was just like so apparent, and something I was thinking about before, is that how we really transform our collective is into relational awakening. It's not enough that I trust my intuition. I need to trust you. Need to trust your intuition. I need to trust how you need to trust your intuition. You need to trust how I trust my intuition. We have to be in conversation in our awakening. And I think that's something that isn't as like tended. It's like because relationships are challenging, and how we relate to each other can be really there. It's a very like disruptive field, but that's something I'm really interested in, just beginning to cultivate this understanding of what does it mean to relationally awaken.
Yeah, well, and because like that's what the thing I come up to for me as you're talking is like a vulnerability. It's like
Mhm.
we're kind of peeling away. It's like, is it safe to peel away layers to be a little bit more vulnerable? And
Mhm.
if the other person, I see them as a threat, or I see any kind of other as a threat, another group or
Mhm.
another country or another individual, that they're a threat to me, it's hard to be like, okay, how can I be vulnerable? But then, like you're saying, like creating a space where I can be that, and then sort of going out to that from that space into relationship.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that you brought in vulnerability. Vulnerability has a Latin root vulvus, which means wound. So to be vulnerable literally means to presence your wound. It's like and it's so it's scary. It's painful to be like, oh, here's my wound, and I'm going to relate with myself and you, and to be seen in that. And that's why I think right now I feel like we're in a kind of a prescriptive culture. Like this means that, and when you experience this, that means you're this, and then this is what you do. And that's why I'm really interested in the mystery. I'm really interested in, like, when I say presence and slowing down, because it is really tender and it is really vulnerable. But I feel like there is infinite intelligence in the spaces between us. There's infinite intelligence in consciousness. And if we can just suspend what we think should be, how we think we are, how we think anything is for a moment, and just like be with what's arising. And because what's arising will arise, and so the suspension happens when it arises, and to like actually look at it for what it is, then like kind of all we've attached to it, to really be able to respond. And I find that while it's not easy, but it's so worthy, it's so like worthwhile of that experience, because I feel like something new actually happens, like something that is without history. Like that's what new is. Like new doesn't have a past. It's like without history. And that I really also feel is born from the spaces between us. Like it's born from our connections, it's born from how we relate, that we can actually find something new. And it's also like how we're relating, if it's we're relating with ourselves or like with the cosmos. I find that's why we can experience so much insight, because when we allow presence to speak, there's actually infinite innovation and possibility calling us like all the time.
Yeah, I think also like that, but there is a relationship to a history, that there is a story
Mhm.
or there's a history that we have to deal with. Like we have that,
Mhm.
who would say, "Oh, it's great to be, I'm in the presence," and then people go, "Wait a minute, there's an inequality, or a
Yeah.
there's an injustice," and then not just society, but even like in personal relationships,
Mhm.
between two people, there can be an injustice that happened, or there can be a
Mhm.
history, and it's like that triggers us into our trauma, or into that pain spot, like
Mhm.
yeah, and then how to come through that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so what I was saying is like not prescribing, because it's like we have like the definition of our trauma and the nature of our pain, it has been well described. And it doesn't mean it doesn't still hurt, right? It still hurts and it's still really painful, but I feel like it's been well explained. But what hasn't been well explained is what happens after trauma, what happens after pain. And so that's when I'm like, I can't say I know exactly what happens either, but that's what I'm saying. When we're present and we're like in a beautiful place, pain will come up. Like in relationships, it happens, trauma comes up, the challenge comes up. And if we can allow it, because I find what we think happens is usually it's like usually a much wider story. For an example I can give is like in the victim perpetrator bystander dynamic, like that drama triangle people talk about. And so many times, so if there's like the abused and the abuser, so many times the abuser has also been abused in some way, right? And because their pain has become a trauma and they haven't, for whatever reason, circumstances of their lives have told them to then become the abuser, I find out when we can, like, and it's not to excuse the action, it's not to excuse the abuse, it's actually just to create a wider field to recognize who has hurt you. And something shifts in that field. Like there's a compassion, there's an understanding. And the thing that happens when someone is an abuser, that's, someone asked me recently, because I've seen a lot of people, and like, how many people have come to me who have been perpetrators, who have assaulted someone, who have hurt someone. Most people who come to people are victims, they're the ones seeking support, and not to call them victims, but people who have experienced being abused. Because what happened is like the container of their shame and their hurt and the guilt, and like I'm like the feeling of being unworthy to be loved when you are an abuser is so strong. And so just like having in a moment of like recognizing compassion, and like I said, the act isn't excused. We can't just like erase what's happened, but we can expand that moment into like the larger history that's present, because there usually is an ancestor behind that person. There is another like culture that has probably colonized that culture. There's something else that's happened, and that opens up the shell of shame. And like something can happen that allows a movement, and I can talk about it, but it's really an experiential thing. And that's what I'm saying, when we're in spaces together, and it really is courageous to like let these things surface, to let racisms and sexisms and all these things surface, and then to respond in a new way, in a wider perspective. It's extremely courageous. It's really scary. It's very vulnerable. It's very tumultuous. But I found it's to me, it's like the only way I've seen to actually move forward and towards something new, something that can alchemize what we've been through. And like when we alchemize something, those particles, their properties, they're transformed. They're not gone. It's not, but it is transformed into something else.
And what I'm hearing too is like that it feels like the first step, but it feels like the telling the truth seems to be like a foundational, or what, like it seems like how do that's the piece that's really hard. It's like, whose truth, what truth, and everybody's kind of fighting over that truth, and no, that's not true, this is true, no, that's not true, this is true. But then it's, do we need that common, I don't know, that common space of agreeing on the truth, or is it,
Right.
what is your thought? Yeah,
That's a great response. And I am recalling the Sixth Sun, something of the Sixth Sun. There's just like this beautiful documentary video series, and I quote this often. There's like all these beautiful people speaking, and there's like grandmothers and elders and like different, and every episode's a different one. And like I remember in the grandma, I don't remember actually which episode, so and I don't remember the name of the person who said this. It was this beautiful Indigenous woman and somewhere in the States, and she said that we need a global wiping of the tears. So I don't know what the truth is, but I know we're all in pain. Like, I know we're all in pain. Like everyone is holding on to, and so if we can acknowledge that we're all in pain and like suspend our need to like qualify one's pain over another's, and I feel like that's a starting place, that it's like in some ways it's an imperfect starting place because of like our history and because of like everything we've come to, but But we are all in pain in some way. And I feel like it's our own pain and fear that's perpetuating a lot of the cycles that we're experiencing.
Yeah, sort of like instead of I want to be right, like I want to be
Mm,
right, or some like going, well, I want to heal, or I want to meet some, like I want, you're saying like I don't know when you say like I don't know the answer, it's like we're starting to let go of, oh, I'm right,
mm,
I know the
yeah.
history, I know my story, I know your story.
Mm,
And start to
mhm.
go, okay, wait, great if I know the story, great if I think I'm right, but that's not what I'm after. If I'm true,
Yeah,
I want something more, which is I
yeah,
want connection. I want intimate,
yeah.
like you're saying, I want intimacy. I want vulnerability. I want to heal. I want a better world, a better
Mhm.
relationship, and if I want those things, I'm connecting at the heart and I say, okay, I want something different.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, exactly. I think it's so beautiful. It's true. And yeah, I mean, there's something that has to, I don't know if you want to, I love the word humility. I'm not going to like, because humility, I love etymology. It has a lot, it means humus. Like, so to be human means to be of the earth. And there is something of returning to
Mm,
to our organic nature of the earth and being like, I don't know, I'm a part of something very large and complex here, you know? And exactly what you said, that just, can we gently open our heart and interact? But and I know, as you know, as I'm saying this, I know relationships and connecting and being alive right now, particularly at this time, it feels, kind of feels like a like landmine a little bit. It's a very like hot bed. And so it can feel challenging to do that. But what we can do is orient from there and then respond. And we will have to have sticky conversations, and we're not going to be sure. I think this thing of like boundaries versus connection, I think is really interesting. Not to bundle up put them versus, but choosing oneself and then choosing to be with other. I think that's a very interesting thing that we're experiencing right now. What does it really mean to really stand for ourselves and then also not to isolate ourselves while we stand there? There's so many, I feel like we're really inundated with all these, I would say, like pop culture one-liners around what does it mean to exist right now, and they can be very confusing. I find them, they're very contradictory, they're very confusing, and and that's why I'm really interested in intuition. I'm really interested in us having that place where we can orient and then respond from like that sense of like inner knowing and that inner trust, and and like I think also giving us ourselves a grace that to even though it might feel right, like our mind might question it, we might doubt because we're really attempting to do something new, like to really sit from a different place. And it's like, can we give ourselves grace and gentleness and like sort of trust, like have that little bit of that faith in this orientation.
mm, okay. Tell me a little bit, how do you, because some people say, well, wait, I can't, I do need my boundaries. What do I do
Oh
here?
yeah.
But then I'm trying to connect. I want to connect, but I do need these boundaries because maybe I am not safe. Maybe I'm not. I
Yeah.
don't feel safe. Even if I just, all it is, I just don't feel safe. Um, so I feel like I need the boundary. What do you? And but then to connect.
Yeah. So when I do my intuition intimacy workshops, we talk about consent as a landscape. And like it's like once again, it's kind of when my whole thing is like, let's see what's right and then be with it instead of defining what we think it is. So one response I have to that is like when I do intuition and intimacy, there might be places that we feel uncomfortable. We might feel like a no, or like we want to stop. Beautiful. Yes, acknowledge that. But maybe it's like it's not the cliff. Maybe it's just it's just how that step feels. So sort of like sitting with
Mhm.
that and then like leaning in. I also someone I've worked with kind of talks about all yes, all no culture. Like, if it's not like a heck yes, it's a no. And just like how so many of us don't we have so many wounds and insecurities around intimacy. So we may come to places that feel like a no. They're actually just invitations for us to feel
Mm,
ourselves.
mm,
Because we have so many wounds and traumas around connecting. So I say all that, and then I also say, there's like so we're living in a time of a paradox. So I know there are moments to just say, to like step out of certain fields, right? And I think there's a lot of ways that we're afraid of being alone, and we're afraid of we're afraid of losing connection, we're afraid of losing belonging, and so we stay in situations longer than they actually serve us. And so I feel like, and maybe this is contradictory, but the thing is, it's depending on where someone's coming from, there are multiple truths being present. And so something that I feel is like, really be discerning with what your environment is responding to you. You know, if you're leaning in and being pausing with your no, what's what the person you're pausing with doing? And how does it feel when they're doing it? Like, are they leaning into? Or are you chasing them? You know, it's like you have to be really discerning and really like objective with what's happening, and then also objective with what we desire, even though these things are like, they're so subjective and it's so emotional, we have so many feelings. There's a moment where we have to be like, what do we really want, and is our environment meeting us there, or if it's not, you know? And then have we tried leaning in? And at some point it's like, okay, you can walk away. And I don't, so my thing with boundaries, and the example I use often is there's no polar bears in Africa. You know, there's just no polar bears in that, because they don't belong there, they won't exist there. And so I feel the more we can be in our natural environment, if we're the Arctic or we're the tundra or we're the high mountains or we're the lush forest, naturally what's meant for us will come to our environment if we cultivate our inner ecosystems. Because if the Sahara is really being well in the Sahara, naturally a polar bear will not come, because it won't survive. It won't even think about it, you know? And I feel like we can do the same for ourselves. And that's what I call natural boundaries. When we cultivate our inner ecosystem, our natural boundaries, our natural environment can take shape, and what will thrive, and what is not meant for us just won't even consider it. We won't even consider entering.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it's like what came out as you're talking was like we're in a dance. Like we're in a dance with ourselves. We're in a dance with
Yeah.
others, and it's like and that dance could end up being a fight. You know, it could be a fight, but it's like if we stop fighting and we just enter our own rhythm and our own self, that like people will our, like you said, our life will reflect that as
Mm-hmm.
within, so kind of without. So I love
Mm-hmm.
that analogy though, that yeah, the polar bear you don't find a polar bear in Africa. Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Tell me a bit about your journey. I think you mentioned a bit in your website, and you like what your journey, especially around depression. I know
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of people have had that issue. I know I've been challenged with that. But is
Mm-hmm.
there anything you'd like to talk to about that, or your
Mm-hmm.
story?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can I respond to something else you were just saying, and then
Yes, please.
respond, because what I want to say is, again, I want to acknowledge that we're in a really interesting time. When I say interesting, we're in like, the word I want to use is we're in a remembrance, we're in an evolutionary moment, and it's very interesting is not that interesting of a word, but I find it very interesting because I want to name what we were just talking about, like finding our own dance, finding our own rhythm. And then for whatever reason, I feel like I've experienced, I think many of us are experiencing things that make us doubt ourselves, or like uncertain, like what I one way you can say it is like we're being tested, or we're being offered lessons, and we're being asked to re-enhance our connection with ourselves. That's one way of saying it. Another way of saying it is, I really feel like what is happening is like in this like remembrance, in this evolution, it's like every cell of us is asked to be in the alchemical process. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, even though it may feel hard to find your rhythm, keep dancing. That's what I want to say. I want to acknowledge that we might be in a time that's hard to find our rhythms, and it might feel like we're getting pushed off, or we're uncertain, and we're getting all these different, we're getting a lot of interference, and I feel there's all this going on. It doesn't mean your dance isn't correct. It doesn't mean your dance isn't worthy. It doesn't mean your dance isn't loving, and can we acknowledge what's coming towards us, to to understand how it's an invitation for us to find our deeper dance, our true dance, the one that is really love space, maybe not just saying it's loving, but actually loving, and to be discerning with ourselves. Eh, Yes, I just wanted to say that.
I love that. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I
Um,
think it's like like softening into ourselves. It feels like a lot of our stories are rubbing us the wrong. Like a lot of the stories we've told ourselves personally or collectively or in relationship are just being like pressed. Like the truth, the inauthenticity to who we truly are is being like it's just rubbing us all like at like sand in an oyster. It's just like, oh, this doesn't
mhm,
belong here. Oh, this is not
yeah,
feeling right. Like, and we're either projecting that out and saying, something outside of us is to blame for that irritation, or like your work of coming in and
mhm,
and and looking into that and looking into intuitively of like, oh, what is my intuition is different than that story.
yeah,
My intuition is different than that feeling. There's something different, and
yeah,
that that separation from a story kind of creates that authenticity, or as I
mhm,
connect to that, and I can
mhm,
connect to other people's, intuition, authentic self. Um, yeah.
yeah, totally. And we must practice our intuition and test it. Honestly, we must, like, it's living is an experiment, and and I know we're in a culture that kind of promotes, obviously promotes fear, and promotes don't take not taking risk, or taking very calculated risk. Like, you take a risk, but it's like very societally accepted risk. Test your intuition. And the way I develop my intuition, which just kind of goes into this, like my story of depression, like kind of going into it. I was fortunate to I worked really hard, saved a ton of money, and just like and went overseas for about 2.5 years, and then I continually have gone overseas for most of the last decade. I was living abroad, and um, I for a for I mean more than a year, but really for a good year, I would wake up every morning not knowing what to do, to the point where sometimes I wouldn't even know where I was going that day. I would be in the middle of random towns. This is very extreme, I recognize, but I had to test, I had to test God. I had to test my connection with God, test my connection with myself. And I would just like open up a map, and then I would hear where to go, and then I would just go there, and I would hear, should I go left or right, and I would just follow it. And it was just what was meant for me. I mean, yes, it was amazing. Yes, it was also challenging. It was weird. It led me to it was like dangerous things. It led me to some amazing things, but really it led me to me. And that's all that really mattered. It wasn't about the content of each day. It's that each of those content actually brought me to myself. That's where I was meant to arrive. I was meant to arrive inside of myself, and like that was just a journey. and it's really allowing life to be an experiment, and to really actively work with our intuition and test it, and to quiet down. Like, I know there's a lot of information, even someone listening to this podcast, that's like, this is information. There's a lot of like external information coming in, and some of it's really beautiful, some of it's really noisy. And I feel like it's also talking about discernment. It's like, how can we take something in, and also like just quiet everything down, just to hear ourselves again. And that was also, I did them what I called, forgot what I called it. It was a detox of some external input detox. And I didn't read, or listen to music, or listen to anything for about a month, like anything other than like what happened naturally around me. This was years ago, and once again, I was in Asia, so it was a gentler space to do this. Um, but I was following all these other like lineages and teachings and practices, and they were helpful. But then when I did that, and I was actually inspired to do that by Jiddu Krishnamurti, who's like, I find him amazing. I really love him. He's a teacher. And he was like, why do you listen to me? Why do you listen to anyone? Just listen to yourself. He's like, why do you have sex or don't have sex? Why do you eat vegan or not eat vegan? Why do you do yoga, don't do yoga? Just listen to yourself. And I was so struck by that, because I was listening to him. I was like, you're like, I was listening. I was so struck that he said, why do you even listen to me? And so it was a time in my life where I took everything quite literally. And so I just, and that inspired me to do this detox. And it was incredible, just the guidance that came, my inner guidance that just really turned on very loudly.
I love what you're saying, because it's like it feels like we're given so many maps by other people who have done their own journey, or
Yeah.
done, like, someone's like, I've really done this amazing journey. Here's the map that I've come with. And you go, oh wow, and everyone goes, oh, that's the map, that's the map, that's the map. And then somewhere along the line it goes, oh, this works, but maybe it doesn't work for me. And like, even like Krishnamurti, like, here's my map, you know,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
he's saying, no, you have the map, you do your work, find your, because whose best map is, like, who's going to map your world for you,
Yeah.
other than, like you're saying, I'm going to traverse my path, and the best way is through your own intuition, through your own movement. what
Mhm,
what led you to say, I need to follow my intuition? What led you to go, this feels like the path for me?
mm,
It's a very bold and kind of like vulnerable thing to do.
mm. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I mean, we all have unique soul contracts and unique dispositions. I do feel like I have a quite unique disposition. Um, so I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, like kind of like Flatbush area, if anyone knows. It's kind of like I mean, it's changing now because of gentrification, but it was like traditionally kind of a low income, dangerous, kind of like the ghetto area. But I always went to private school. So I was in Catholic. I like never went to public school my whole life. My parents are from Panama, and my mom was very adamant that we have a private school education, because particularly in that time, public schools were terrible in New York City. And so, like, already there, that's a very interesting thing. Like, growing up kind of in the ghetto and then going to like school with the 1%, but I went to an high school. It was like the Ivy League of high schools in New York City. And there was like celebrity kids in my grade and like very rich people in my grade, and worlds away from the world I knew. So that, like, already there's like a unique just variance. And high school was like, so when we talked about earlier, we mentioned my depression. So high school was really hard for me. Like, that was, I don't, and it's interesting. I still have a hard time kind of talking about that, and like, because and maybe that's that, I don't know, it's not the nature of depression. I kind of want to talk to more people about the nature of their depression, because I was underwater. I couldn't sleep. Everything was numb. But then also I was young. I was diagnosed with depression at 14. So there's also, I'm really young, so my brain's developing, and like I don't really understand things. I'm also extremely empathic, but no one knows that. No one knows those words. I'm sensing class, I'm sensing racism, I'm sensing all these things, but no one's talking about it. I don't know I'm sensing. I know now because I'm looking back, but I didn't know what I was sensing. I didn't understand my discomfort. And then I just got really sad because I felt really lonely. And that loneliness and that sadness was like being in a well. And like, and in a well, like there's like, you can't hear very well. And yeah, like, they say depressions are I was extremely repressed. I felt I was wrong. And I was like extremely repressed. And that lasted, I mean, there was like, of course, it's not, there were moments of nice things and beauty and normal that, but that was like that was the continued way of my continued being. And then I had a therapist, and she was like, when you go to college, it will get better. And then I went to college, and it was more the same. Like, I was a little different, but I was still depressed. And then I don't know. No one told me after college. I was like, am I supposed to be happy when I'm dead? Like, I was like, I don't understand. I don't understand this world. Going to New York City, and then everyone just wants to get a job or go to grad school, or for my university, and then being in an environment I grew up in. And then I started working, and everyone at their jobs looked depressed to me, and they all looked sad, and they all looked miserable. And I was so confused. I was like, did we come to life to be sad? Is this why we came to life, to feel like we're underwater? And when I looked around the city, everyone was just gray. And so that's what really, I was like, there must be something more than this. There has to be something more than this. I was like, like hell bent on that. I don't, that's probably not the best phrasing, but I was like really sure. I was so sure. I was so sure there has to be more to life than this because we're alive. I didn't really have any information other than the fact that we're breathing, and that must mean something. It must mean something. And then I don't know. I think at this time when I was, yeah, okay. So I was feeling this before I knew anything about spirituality or meditation or anything like this. I didn't know anything, but I knew about, I studied abroad, and nature in Europe is like way more accessible than nature in New York City, and I just was like, nature's amazing. I did do psilocybin one day when I was in Amsterdam, and I climbed a tree, and I had what someone called an eco awakening. I climbed a tree and I was like, I'm a tree, and then after the psilocybin subsided, I still felt like I was a tree. Like I was like, I'm nature. Why didn't anyone tell me? Like no one told me. Gray. I was like, gray boxes. Like the sidewalks are gray, the subway's gray. My lunch comes in a box. I was just like, that was the cubicle. I was like, that's all I knew was gray boxes, and like no one told us that we were nature. That we're like, I mean, now I think it's different. I was just like, so many things I'm just like shocked that people just like, don't say to you, growing up, and then so got really interested in the environment, and so I was like, I want to go. Have you heard of woofing?
Sounds familiar, but no.
Worldwide Organizations of Organic Farming, something. I think that's what it
Okay,
stands
yes,
for.
yes. Hmm.
And so when I was in Europe, I don't know how I heard about it. Maybe I heard about it when I was studying abroad, or maybe I was just Googling. As I was like, desperately Googling, YouTubing, anything. I heard of woofing because I got interested in the environment, and I was like, I'm gonna get my master's in environmental communication or something like this. But before I do that, I want to experience it. I don't want to just study it more. First, I want to experience it. So that was my first round of saving a ton of money, working 7 days a week, saving a ton of money so I could go woofing in Europe. And so so around your questions, what motivated me, it was just that. It was just like this deep belief that there's something more. And then connecting with nature and knowing that we were nature, and just like being able to hold on to that. Even when I was working and exhausted, everyone thought I was crazy. I mean, this was 2013. This was before this was popular. This was a decade ago now that I did this. And this was like, I mean, Instagram, I think, had just started or something. This is like, now all this stuff is so much more accessible, and people talk about it, and people take photos, and people, it's a lot different. 10 years ago, it was like, I was crazy. Like everyone thought I was crazy. But I was like, I have to, like, I'm sad and I'm young, and I'm like, it's just, and I don't want to go to happy hour, and I don't want to get drunk, and I'm like so confused. I'm so confused, And so that was my motivation. Yeah.
What's coming up for me as you're talking is like this, going back to like trauma or intimacy. It's like when we're thinking like, oh, I want to be intimate or connected with other people, what seems to come through, at least for myself too, and as your story, is like we are not even connected to ourselves. We're not even intimate with ourselves.
Mhm.
That literally, that disconnect from ourselves is like the first step or the first piece of like, well, and the more I'm like, and the reality of who I am is like, oh wow, I'm nature. I'm literally my body. Like I am a piece and a part, inseparable from this this life, this
Mhm.
organic presence. And when I'm waking up into that, that becomes that part that goes, oh wow, okay, now I'm, is that, yeah, that's the first step into that intimacy. Um, yeah.
Absolutely.
And then tell me a bit more about the work you're doing now. I guess what.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you for asking. And I appreciated when you were speaking before around people like, here's the map, and then it's like, but you're the map. And because like that's something I come to in myself, but not really, because I really trust the way I offer work. But I recognize, because when I started doing this work, it was 2018. And once again, it was a lot less popular than it is now. Or like a lot of people are coaches now, a lot of people are healer. Blah, blah. I'm not a coach, but not, but like when you're doing a sort of work, you get lumped in. It's that like life coach thing that a lot of people are doing. Um, and then there's also, it's interesting. Okay, I'm going to answer your question, but it's interesting then what people begin to assume and like connect with what it means to to receive that. So then we get guides, then we get PDFs, then we get freebies, then we get, and then it's like, it becomes very didactic, prescriptive. And I remember one time I read a post and I was like sharing how I shared something with a previous partner, and I was like, it was so simple. And then someone messaged me and they're like, what is it? And I was like, oh, let me schedule a call. And they're like, oh, I was expecting a PDF. He thought I had like a PDF to be like, it's so simple. Here's my 3-step. I was like, no, it's relational. Like, it's like, let's hop on, like, 20 minutes doesn't have to be, and there's nothing connected to it, but it's relational, So yeah, the work I do now, I do a few different things, as you're saying, like from trauma healing to intimacy to a few different things. But I'm going to talk about intersoul wisdom because that connects to intuition and more. I love intersoul wisdom. I mean, because it really is everything we're talking about. My journey in 3 months, and I feel like I'll extend it, maybe make it a little bit, make it 4-month journey, but. It was an experiment. At the 2019, I was doing one-on-one healing work, and it was meaningful. But what's really meaningful is teaching people, not really teaching people, supporting people to remember how to connect with their own intuition. Because that's what was really, that has been and continues to be the most meaningful thing I've ever experienced in my own life. And I wanted to share that with people. And so I was like, and it was 7 years of my life. And I was like, can I condense that into 3 months? And so it's an experiment. And the journey of intersoul wisdom, I've done it now, I know 6 or 7 times. I started in 2020, and it's always the same. So it's actually a structure, but the structure itself is the field of intuition. That's the structure. So the first month is meditation, and we do these particular meditation practices that are just so helpful for inner silencing and really coming into your I am presence. And then the next month, I call it auric listening. And we, once again, have really simple practices, but that really like open up your own capacity to recognize the memories and the stories and the histories that's in your body. And it's really amazing. And I received that. So there's a period of my life, about 2 years, where I was channeling, I was receiving information, and I practiced it on myself, this thing called auric listening. And it's a way of like listening to your body parts, listening to your energy centers, listening to anything. It's like, and so it's based on this premise that everything is sentient, everything is alive, everything is consciousness. And we have the capacity to listen to the consciousness of everything, because everything is living. And we start with ourselves. So and it's very simple, and it's very meaningful. And the last month is beginning to like self energy heal with touch and sound. And so I feel deeply listening is healing. I mean, deeply listening is healing. And we also have the capacity to manipulate, to change, to transform, to bring again to love. Manipulate, etymology, mani means hand, and pleu means to fill. So to manipulate literally means to fill your hand, which literally is like touch energy healing. It's like we're filling our hand with loving energy, and we're allowing release, and we're allowing to like restoration to come inside. And we also I find sound is just so powerful, understanding frequency. And so it's really about allowing our throats to open to the frequency of emotions and energies, and sort of working with that. So yeah, that's one aspect of my work that I really love. And yeah, and then there's also, I work with people one-on-one, and I support people with like, so a lot of it's ancestral. A lot of it is about like the inherited trauma, and a lot of it, and also like other lifetimes, soul retrieval work, and inner child healing. And those all dance together. But I find a lot of our immediate present patterns and challenges are inner child, ancestral inner child. Like those are the two places that are speaking. And so we do sort of these maybe more shamanic like trance journeys, and it's really interactive. So I really guide people to receive in them, to receive their own information, sort of be in that somatic inside visual place together. Yeah, and then there's intuition and intimacy, which is
and expansion. It's like into soul wisdom in relationship. And so that's been also an experiment. And so I've done about 4 times, 3 hours in person, and there's so much there. As we were talking about, there's so much there. And so I want to expand it, but it was kind of an experiment of being intuitive together, being intuitive in our relationships. Can we expand ways of being together and ways of touching each other without touching, well, not physically touching, but like touching emotionally, touching energetically, and kind of create frameworks around that. So I really love that too. And then last thing, and I'm going to I think next year they're all going to come together. It's only like one thing somehow. But right now they're all like, I feel like there's a body of my work, and these are all the limbs, these are different limbs and organs, and they're all, and like, my work teaches me what it wants to be, what it is. And then so the embodied soul retreats, which is based in this premise, kind of what we were talking about earlier in the call. For me, it's like, what happens after healing? And I know we're not after healing yet, but Einstein said this: if you're going to find a solution, you have to find it at a different level of the problem. I forget, I'm not quoting that perfectly. But I find that a lot of healing, even the healing work I do, which is so powerful and so meaningful, starts at the level of the problem, starts at the level of the pattern or the trauma. Perfect, great. But we need spaces that start at the level of the solution, that start where we want to be, that start free and liberated and embodied and ecstatic. And of course, like you're talking about, things are going to come up, and they're meant to, and they're welcome. It's not about bypassing. It's just about starting as embodied souls. It's starting in the Garden of Eden. And as much as we can, from where I am and where our team is, like cultivating a space of that beauty, and then slowness and presence to respond to the places of us that are triggered, that are reactive, that are traumatized in that space, like in that generative space, in that embodied soul space. So that's the body of my work right now.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's like what I'm hearing is like, it's cultivating those spaces to plant the seeds from, move out from. If we don't cultivate the soil, the meditation, we don't cultivate that soil, that intuition of that, the rich earth and what's in there, what's, that darkness. Who am I? What, like, I don't know. Okay, what, being in that space, we can take that space and grow it, and then into our lives, and become that. Outwardly into relationship, into connection.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hearing. Yeah. And I love the story, like you said. I'm kind of listening to you, and the story of your the different school you went to. It's like it felt like you were between worlds, and that gave you a space to now be between worlds. The shamanic world, like I was in between worlds, and in that space you went, oh, that's, because I think sometimes we can live in a place that's, if you live in a life that's comfortable, there's not a reason to change. And you're like, oh, this path works, this is what I am, this is what I should be. And sometimes we can use drugs and alcohol or addictions to sort of stay in this like comfortable space. But it's like when we're invited to embrace our trauma or embrace our pain, that becomes kind of that gift that you can go like, okay, I'm gonna go deeper. I'm gonna find like that piece of sand in the oyster and go, okay, I'm really gonna look at this and go into it. I'm intuitively like, like you're saying, I gotta follow that thread. That seems to be the way, and what I love about your work is like that following that thread seems to be what I'm hearing. It's what you're doing.
Thank you for that reflection. Yeah, it is, it really is. And it's really like immersive and like all encompassing for me, and also it feels so, I use the word experiment a few times. I feel so like what could be, what could be. I'm really into that because I think we're all into it, I think we're all really into what could be. And the more of us that like kind of put all our chips in, to like really stand of it, then it becomes less scary. It becomes less scary. The soil is more nourished and we're standing together. But it is, it really is just following that thread and then letting that thread kind of like color my whole life.
Yeah. Well, and for me, part of this podcast is the work of like doing that, like, how do I merge that part that's that deep inner spiritual work with also, this isn't everybody's journey, but for me, I'm very also curious and passionate about political work of like, I could be this way, but then how does this relate to the fact that, the global economy or the war in Iraq or, or disparaging between, all the, racism and sexism and all these things and to bring that new spirit, not new, but like that cultivated inner work and that new truth I have of, oh, I am nature. I am connected to we all are one. We all are part of the same mystery of God or the same mystery of the unknown, and bringing that into the truth of real world life and saying, okay, how
Yeah.
do I relate this to real world?
Mhm.
Can be very vulnerable and tricky because often the people we're interacting with don't have that perspective at all. They have a very
Mhm.
rigid, stuck perspective.
Mhm.
Anyway, that's
Mhm.
that's my thought. Like how I'm still searching that up. Like how do
Yeah.
you do that? How do you do that? I don't know. But
I have to take my throat. I just got like a chill.
Mhm.
Mm. I want to say I so appreciate. Okay, hold on.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah. So talking about that, I was just talking about the intuition. We're just taking a quick break here. That's okay.
Red is back. Sorry, I just got
Can you hear me?
talking. I'm like
No, that's
still
good.
congested. Okay, I'm back. I'm ready. um, well, I want to say I'm so grateful for what you just said, and for that you're willing to go there and weave in global economy and politics and all of those things with spirituality, because so many people turn away from one to look at the other. And I feel like the way we move forward is like how much we can include. And it doesn't mean we have to include everything. There's no polar bears in Africa. It's okay.
Mhm.
But there's like an Africa with without polar bears, and that and Arctic with polar bears, and it's all good. But how much of ourselves, how much of where we have come from and what have been born into us that we can include. And being in the USA and being from this country, there's many things that have been born into us. There's many things of our lineage that's true. Many things that's true. So I'm talking about this contemporary socio-political time, but also this deep indigenous time, the fact that many of us are immigrants, the fact that some of us aren't. There's so much that's true, and how much can we interweave these truths and allow them to not be paradoxes, but to be different and distinct and yet one. And I feel like just by attempting is sort of, it's the expression, like similar, I was saying, like, I don't know necessarily how to respond, but in some ways the practice is the response. The practice is the knowing, just creating the space and like presencing the two together is a part of the response. And I feel like you just saying, like, talking about racism and sexism and global economy, and then the oneness, like so many ways, just like allowing that tension to meet and not be a tension, to actually just be a part of like the miraculous expression of divinity and humanity in our beings. And yeah, it's really, I'm really personally, I'm not so much political, but I would say like socioeconomically, I'm like very interested because it comes up like colonialism, racism, sexism, which comes in the way of assault, is in almost every one of my sessions, because it informs our patterns, it informs our desires, and it informs our challenges. Like cultural oppression, whether you're an oppressor or you are oppressed, informs the patterns that prevent us from meeting our desires for almost everyone. And it doesn't mean that we have to overly identify or define ourselves by that, but by acknowledging them in an energetic way, like acknowledging them for what they are and acknowledging how they sit in our bodies, in our nervous system, and our energy systems, provides a holistic movement that just talking about chakras, but just talking about energy doesn't, because the fact that your ancestor had slaves impacts the way you're looking at money right now. And the fact that your ancestors may have been a slave impacts how you're looking at relationships right now. It matters. And so weaving that conversation in is the only truth I know. It's like what's present, it's what's true.
Yeah, and I think of also like that recognizing one's like, I'm fish in water, not recognizing them in water. Like I am, a white male in the society. I don't know what it's like to be not this, but I do know, like I can go into my intuition of who I am relating. And the other aspects comes up is like, it's not my job to be a martyr or to fix everything, and not my job to, like, even a relationship, it's not my job to be the martyr for a relationship or fix the relationship. In fact, that's often not even wanted. Like, no, please stop trying to fix it, but just be authentically yourself. Is what I'm seeing as like really getting intimate with myself and intimate who I am, and then relating that to other people as equal, as a, and the curiosity as to like what is your what is your intuition, what is it like? I like what you're saying about intuition. What are you feeling? What's coming up for you? Like and how do we relate to each other in that space, in mutuality?
Because in its essence, that's extremely inclusive. Like by you connecting with your intuition and by knowing yourself and being with yourself and being honest, it's going to include whatever is in your ancestry, whatever is in your lineage. And if you're discerning, if you're like kind of taking that on, us knowing ourselves will include our ancestry. It will include where we have come from, and the hope it will alchemize and like open up a new path of where we're going, and acknowledging someone else fully in that way is also extremely inclusive of where they've been through and what has happened to them. I feel I wonder, a patience is coming up. Like I feel like, when I'm feeling into one is a feeling of me and not just like feeling myself and all they are. It's like patience and acknowledgement that nourishes the space for that arrival, because it is vulnerable, as you said before. And it's like, can we slow down? Like, how much can we slow down?
Oh, I think we're breaking up a little bit. Maybe we're trying to, we're intuitively being told to slow down. Can you hear me still? Oh, there we go.
Was that me or you?
I'm not too sure.
Okay.
You're popped off, but I think we're getting some intuitive messages here.
Yeah. Slow down. I heard me say, but I was like,
yeah.
slow down. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, patience. Yeah, to have
Patience.
like we're not gonna. But yeah, I like that what you're saying there about patience. Giving us the space for things to unfold a bit, to unravel and shift and change. Sometimes that needs time.
Yeah. Yeah. I know what I'm noticing right now is the tension. You know, I feel like there's so much tension and it's kind of what I talked about earlier, like sort of the line, a land minefield, land field. And so I know when I'm expressing what's being expressed is true. And I also recognize the tension or the challenge of meeting. And so I think I feel like it's also, yeah, it's the same thing. It's like trusting and patience to meet others and be in environments that allow that sense of patience and trusting and are available. Because I find that, sorry, I'm so stuffy. It just like came on. Okay. Yeah, are you still here? I'm not sure if you're frozen or not. I think you're frozen. I think we're still recording. So maybe I'll keep talking. I don't know if we're gonna get kicked off again. Hello? Okay. Maybe I'll just keep talking and and we'll see what happens. Okay, yeah. Oh, but it's still recording. Okay. I guess I can keep talking because I think it will still record. Um, Having patience with ourselves and our discernment and the spaces that we are drawn to and the spaces that we decide to say no to. And I feel like we're right in the middle of a story. And we're right in the middle. And so I feel like leaning on these practices and trusting ourselves and trusting the unfolding and know that we're nowhere near the end. That it's like honestly, we're always in the middle. Like we're always in this unfolding and this ever becoming. And so when the tension arises, it's like giving ourselves that grace. Mhm.
There we go. So I guess there we go. I'm back.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I wasn't. So I was. Yeah, I kept talking a little bit because it was still recording.
Good. Good. Yeah, it's still recording, but I got once it bounces off somehow.
Yeah.
Sorry what I missed what you said, but
A quick synopsis is basically I mentioned the tension, and then it's just like this acknowledgement that we're not at the end. We're in the middle, you know, and we're
yes.
always in an ever evolving middle. And so it's just sort of trusting to lean into places that lean into us, and being okay with who we choose to walk away from, and know that this isn't the end of our story. That we're really evolving, and we're really in this like we're in this emergent future, emergent presence, emergent moment, and to just allow patience and grace, because what's meant for us is we're still traveling. It's still traveling. We're in motion, and to like just allow and give space to that.
Yeah, and I what's come up to is like just a forgiveness, like just kind of like just continue to let go of the baggage and step in. It seems like it's a constant keep coming back to the self, keep coming back to intuitively to oneself and the mystery of who we are, and kind of releasing more and more from the stories and letting other people, giving some allowance for other people to maybe not be in that same space we are. And that's okay. And that
yeah, and trusting that there are people there somewhere in the places that we can meet, you know. And yeah.
Well, and even like thinking of family, and families can be tough, and so can, you know, communities and global communities, and it's like we are here with each other. We're not all, you know, a lot of us we're not perfect. A lot of us are still abusers, or you know, we're still in a cycle, and it's like how to be with that. I guess that's a good question, is like how to be with a world that's imperfect and a world that's not, maybe even doing this work, you know, and what do we do, you know, in those spaces?
A lot of us are still abusers and we're still in an imperfect world. It's true. And what do we do? Go to trees. I think you bringing in forgiveness is really beautiful because it's forgiving. And it's not necessarily like we're offloading onto nature, or even offloading onto source or allness or God, creator, or whatever. But it's really, I feel, find resources. And earth is such a beautiful resource. And then also be a resource, like be a resource of the earth, be a resource of yourself, of your ancestors, of each other. I really love that word resource. It's along with regenerative and generative. And I feel like when we allow ourselves to be a resource and when we are resourced, that's when newness can come in, you know? Meditation, all these practices are super powerful, but when you're in a state of activation, not everyone has that pathway to come into silence. But like walking in nature or connecting with trees, allowing yourself to be a resource to a tree, you know, picking up a piece of trash in a park, it kind of connects us with something larger. And I feel like that connection brings insight and innovation.
Yeah, what's coming up too, I'm thinking like we're always in the now. Like the now moment is our ultimate resource. We're here. We're in the now, and there's nowhere to go. That we're actually we can sort, like right now we can drop into the beauty of life. We can drop into the grace of life. We can say, you know, we can drop into the love of life, and just be like, we can resource that now, even in the middle of whatever pain or trauma we're feeling. All that meditative practice, all that intuitive practice can be like, is to bring us to the now. Like, yes, this is why, you know, and then bring that out into the world, not to stay, you know, hibernated in it, or not to stay, you know, in that spiritual bypassing, like, I'm in my bubble and I'm great, but like resource it, bring it out, resource, like that dance, in, out, in, out. The flow of nature, the season. Yeah,
absolutely. I find the present moment is our greatest gift. You know, it's like, and we are the gift of the present moment. Like we are the present moment, we are that gift. And when we allow our perspective and consciousness to align with that, which, you know, I have this, I being present, I feel it's challenging to be present, you know, to like really, I know in my practice, for about a year, I think it's 2014, I was like reading all the Buddhist texts, and I was like doing a lot of meditation, and that helped with my depression, but I also felt quite numb, actually. It was actually just kind of numbing me out. I didn't realize that, but I knew I wasn't as sad. But something was aligning, and then I sat a Vipassana course. I sat a 10-day meditation retreat. Are you familiar with Vipassana?
I am, but please describe a little bit.
It's a 10-day meditation retreat held in, I'm not sure what the style is, but it's led by this man named Gwenka. And it's where you meditate for about 10 hours each day. And it's like these two different type of meditation practices called Anapana, which is breath, and Vipassana, which is body scanning. And I think it was on the first one, it was my 7th or 8th day. I've had this quote on my desktop for years, like during college and a few years after. And it said, "Wherever you are, be all there." And it was a quote by Jim Elliott. And I've had that for so long. And I remember on I think it was like the 7th day, I went outside and the sun was shining, and I heard that line, "Wherever you are, be all there." And I realized my body, my mind, my emotions, and my like eye consciousness was all right there, standing on that concrete with the flowers, with the sun. And I realized presence, and I realized that like the reason I was actually feeling numb before, I wasn't actually feeling the fullness of the present moment. And ever since then, I've like realized like it feels like such a gift to actually feel present, to actually like be fully present is such a gift. When we give, and it feels like something we give ourselves, we like let our mind not worry about what was, or what will be, or what we have to do, and just like be exactly in the room. I'm like looking at the room I am right now. It's like being exactly where we are. It's so beautiful. And then, like you said, it's an endless resource. It's actually, it's so generative. It's so all encompassing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like for me the big challenge is, can I be okay with what really is? What, like, the room I'm in, the place I'm in life, the place I'm in this time of my life, you know, all these things of just in the moment where I'm at. Like, is
Mm-hmm.
this actually okay? Is this actually
Mm-hmm.
wonderful? Is this actually beautiful? Is this actually amazing? Yeah, even if there's things in my head that go, "Oh, it's not any of that," but because
Right.
that's a story of who I'm supposed to
Yes.
be.
It
Like a
is a
map in my
story.
brain. And I can
Yeah.
go, no, this is what's real. This is what's beautiful. Like, it is beautiful, and that takes away from an aggrandizement of what I'm supposed to be. I think sometimes that's it, like my own self-importance. I'm supposed to be, but it's like, oh, this is, and it's like you said, it's a humble, just a humble and be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that you said, because it's so true. I mean, it's so true. And so what I've noticed is like we have to actively give ourselves a gift of presence. We have to actively choose to give ourselves a gift of being present. And so let's see if I can describe, because it's I find manifestation is great. I mean, I think I'm a great manifester, whatever that means, because I think I just connect with presence and then things can come. But I find that a lot of maybe law of attraction or manifestation mythology really takes us out of the present moment. We're really noticing and focusing on what's not there and wanting to pull that into our existence to feel happy, well, fulfilled, whatever it is. And it's not, and then so it's not to downplay the meaningfulness of our desire. Desire is beautiful. Desire is like eros, it's like life force. But when we attribute our desire with needing to manifest something external to be fulfilled, we kind of get a bit, we kind of get contorted. We get contorted on some things, and then it could work. I mean, manifestation totally works. It could work, but what are we actually generating, and what's sustainable, for our overall wellness? And so I find that when I acknowledge desire and let it be and the inspiration for its own sake, like letting desire exist for its own sake and not necessarily attributing it with like exact facets that I need, so it's like doing, it's inspiration, action. It's just like, oh, let's just have the inspiration for no reason at all. And then it's and this is a bit from existential kink. I think Carolyn Elliott, or I don't know her name, but excellent kink. It's that we want what we have, and it's like, and actually just like being with what we have and sort of compounding our desire and our love and our attention on what is present kind of just creates more juice, it creates more vitality and nourishment. And it's a more generative place to be than focusing on what's not there. And that's separate from like having goals and like writing things down and like having aspiration. It's not about not ever seeing into the future. It's about how we're orientating our sense of fulfillment and our sense of vitality. And I find that's like not really I feel like it's a nuance that's not really spoken about. Yeah.
Yeah, and the kind of going back to what you talked about, patience. It's like, yes, having
Mhm.
the dream, putting that prayer out there that, yes, this is what I want. This is the juicy future I want. This is what I really, and then coming into the now with
Mhm.
the patience of that, and then being present with the now and saying, okay, wow, this is it. Like, I already have so much. Like, you know,
Mhm.
that this moment is really rich.
Mhm.
Sometimes, like they always say, the journey is, you know, it's the journey, not the destination, you know, but we really
Yeah.
want that destination, you know, but
Yeah.
in the journey to it. Yeah.
Mhm. A dancer said, it was so beautiful. He said on his in this like poetry, why do you always see the Buddhas meditating? Because even enlightenment is impermanent. You know, it's like we really just must surrender to this constant practice of being and like being in the present moment and allowing ourselves to align with what is.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's no nirvana there's no heaven we're getting to, because once we're there, it becomes boring and we want the next one, you know. Like
Mhm.
life is constantly evolving and changing. That's what I've recognized the purpose. Like if you're always looking towards like, oh, a perfect thing, you know, even if you get to it, no longer like, oh, okay. You know, but to the keep evolution of it,
Mhm.
journey of it.
Yeah. And there's like, oh, I've been really into allowing simplicity and that, and like actually like desiring simplicity. It's just like simplicity, simplicity of connection, simplicity of being, and yeah, wanting wanting that to be in my relational connections, and like what would that mean to just allow more simplicity, and like that I feel like that's what the present moment offers, because it's like I have water, like in this moment what is sustaining the body because I'm alive, and that's quite simple. You know,
Yeah.
and like
Yeah.
you said, it doesn't mean the dream dies or any of those things. It's actually like it's actually it's a part of, it can actually can be part of the simplicity, part of the presence if we're not identifying with needing it. It's just like a part of what it means to be alive in the moment.
Yeah. Well, what I'm thinking is like the non-attachment, you know, it's like you're
Mhm.
where you let go of the attachment of all those things, which can be and you know, the simplicity can feel very uncomfortable at times.
Mhm.
You know, just being in a room with someone else, then you don't really have anything to do. Okay, what do we, you know, there's an uncomfortableness of like, oh, what am I, yeah, what do we do? Yeah.
Mhm.
But yeah, then it kind of dropped into that.
Yeah, yeah, it's like kind of I feel that, so it's like allowing to move through that initial discomfort. I mean, if you look at animals, like what are they doing? You know, they're being. I mean, look at most animals are just like being for most of the
Yeah.
day. You know, they're getting food, they're eating, and then a lot, and maybe they're making some home. A lot of times they're being, and that was something. But I recognize that discomfort of like the non-action, the non-doing, which is kind of more of like an Eastern philosophy. And in the West, we're all about doing, even healing, even self-improvement, even everything. It's all action orientated. But you
Yeah.
know, that Eastern philosophy of really of non-doing. And I first did the intuition and intimacy workshops. I hope you can come to one sometime whenever I do them
Yeah,
again.
it sounds fantastic.
Yeah, that's a lot of people people standing in silence together and sensing, like a lot of it, and it's and at first, of course, I have my own thing of like, oh, is it enough? But of course it is. Like being with each other in silence. I mean, for me personally, that's like I'm like, oh, I would love to do that, you know. But also, it's because people are feeling and experiencing, and there's so much happening. It's just not outward, you know. It's like internal and sensing, and then when they share, it's so rich, which we know the field of information is of consciousness is all around us, and it's infinitely intelligent. And so when we see animals just like laying and observing nature, there's infinite experiences happening. And it's like when we allow ourselves to kind of get out of the logical patterned ways of being and doing, we give space for that emergence within ourselves and within our relations. And it is uncomfortable at first because we're not used to it. And it feels awkward,
Mhm.
you know. But it's like, okay, let's lean into it. Let's like move through that. And then it's really beautiful. It's like really beautiful and really energizing.
Wonderful. Well, hey, thank you so much for your time. Is there any last thoughts? That was a great last thought. I love that. Just being, just the presence
Yeah.
of being. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, me too. And last thoughts.
I just be gentle. I feel like be gentle with ourselves as we remember what it means to be present with all that we are. Yeah.
Well, thank you for your time. That was a nice
Thank you so
conversation. I
much.
appreciate it.
Me
All right.
too.